Why are the nations in an uproar? Well, Nathan, years ago, a psalmist wrote Psalm 2 talking about the nations being in an uproar and asking the rhetorical question, why are the nations in an uproar and the peoples devising a vain thing? And now, all these many years later, we see the nations still in an uproar, still angling for position and power, but over and over again devising vain things.
I think it's because the powers behind them are satanic. Satan is called the god of this world. What are Satan's ambitions? We read in the book of Isaiah, his ambitions are to be worshipped like God, to have ultimate power, to eject God from his domain and to rule and reign. And as fallen humans, what do we want? We want the same thing. What's that old song? Everybody wants to rule the world. And so these people, they ascend to power, and what do they want? They want to rule the world.
Well, we've seen in just recent weeks how Iran, who has proven itself to be a nefarious actor on the world stage in so many ways, has convinced our own American administration to give back $6 billion of its oil revenue. And for what? Well, because they have taken hostage a handful of Americans who they agreed to release. And the danger in this is we as Americans have always resisted paying a ransom for hostages, because once you start down that path,
Absolutely.
you create more hostage taking because you just do the math. Let's see, every American's worth about $1.2 billion. If I take 10, I can have this much. It incites more of the same, and yet the Biden administration has given the Iranians $6 billion with the fig leaf claim, well, they won't use it for evil actions. You know what? They free up $6 billion other dollars to do things that are horrific. And let's be very clear, Iran has stated that it wants to destroy Israel, to wipe it off the face of the map, and to destroy the great Satan, which is America. Why would our leaders even consider such a vain thing as this?
It seems like the leaders who are the most humanist in nature, who have the least Bible background, tend to have no problem hugging any kind of dictator they want. They also usually tend to be put their hearts and minds against Israel when it comes to policies. We know that Iran has a theocratic government through the Ayatollahs. God bless the people of Iran. They want to be free of that. They don't want to follow their government, but they're restricted and oppressed just like they want to do to the Israelis. The Iran wages proxy wars through Hezbollah and Hamas and other organizations in an attempt to destroy Israel. And we read prophetically in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39 that Iran will join a coalition of nations led by Russia that will try to attempt to destroy Israel. So even though it seems like these nations rage, like you said in Psalm 2, the Lord sits in heaven and he does what?
He sits in heaven and laughs. And he laughs not because this is funny or because it is humorous, but because the puny efforts of mankind to thwart his will come to absolute naught. That is why it is a vain or an empty thing. You know, we give credit where credit is due here at Christ in Prophecy and at Lamb and Lion Ministries. So for years, we have credited a Democratic president, that being Harry Truman, to following the teaching that he'd learned probably in Sunday school to bless the Jewish people. And in spite of counsel he got from all sorts of advisors, his own military personnel, his State Department diplomats, including a great exemplar for me, George C. Marshall, who came up with the Marshall Plan. Marshall absolutely opposed supporting Israel when they declared independence, but Harry Truman had the strength of character and conviction by biblical understanding. He wasn't a perfect man, but he at least was faithful to bless the Jewish people in that moment. And yet, over and over again, we've seen American administrations, most of the left-leaning ones, going against what is good for Israel, and even in this case, what's good for America. It is a vain thing, and it seems absolutely foolhardy to encourage and enable the Iranians with their evil intent.
Well, that's what's interesting about the Gog-Magog prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39. God puts hooks in the jaws and drags them down to Israel.
Yeah.
So all these countries that hate Israel and want to be destroyed, prophetically, God lets them build up their resistance against him, their rebellion against him, their hatred of his people, to not bless Israel and incur his curse. So when they do come down to try to destroy Israel, the prophecy reveals that the Lord will step out into human history again, and he will destroy those armies like supernaturally. We're talking about fire and brimstone, earthquakes, hail. They're going to turn on each other, and they will be destroyed on the mountains of Israel. So all this raging of these nations that we see, and there's a spiritual component, because obviously Satan hates the Jewish people and wants them destroyed, is that it's all leading up to the fact that God will judge them.
He certainly will. You know, another thing that happens every fall, folks, is the United Nations General Assembly meets in New York City. The United States had a lot to do with the formation of the United Nations following World War II. President Wilson, back at the turn of the last century, was in favor of a League of Nations, but it was going to give over so much autonomy that the United States wanted for itself that the Senate never ratified that treaty. And yet, after World War II, the United States supported the effort to bring together the nations of the world. And so every fall they get together and they spend a lot of time jawing. It's gotten to the point that some leaders don't even bother coming. So the leaders of China, France, Great Britain, Russia did not come. Obviously, if Vladimir Putin came, there was a chance he could have been arrested as an international war criminal. But our own president went because he wanted the photo op, and yet most of the talk that happens in a place like the United Nations, I dare say not most, but much of the talk that happens in a place like the United Nations is not in the interest of the United States and is clearly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. That seems to be their number one mantra at that place.
What's interesting about this Gog-Magog war is not only does Russia and Iran and Turkey and all come against Israel and the Lord destroys them, but the prophecy also says, and it gives a list of ancient names but point to modern names, basically the Arab states and the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions.
Yes.
The merchants of Tarshish were considered at the time Great Britain and Spain, so the young lions could possibly be referring to the New World. Regardless, what it says is that all the countries step back and they just watch it happen. They don't get involved in the destruction of Israel, but they don't mind if these countries destroy Israel. So we know that happens, but then if we could read the prophecies in Zechariah 12 and 14, they prophesy that all the nations of the world during the tribulation will come against Israel and destroy them. So the United States policy of being friends to Israel will eventually turn totally 180 degrees.
You know, it's funny you say that. I mentioned the United Nations. It was the United Nations who had absolutely no impact in preventing the wars that Israel fought in the last 50 years. So in 1967, the United Nations Secretary General actually told his troops to get out of the way when the Arabs were threatening so that they would not impede the Arab attack. In 1973, the United Nations had no interest in protecting Israel from the onslaught of the Arab armies until the tides turned and Israel became clearly victorious in that war. And then the United Nations wanted to intervene right away. There is a nefarious, and as Nathan already said, a satanic motivation behind many of these ideologies and these efforts on the world scene. Absolutely. Christians need to be aware of what's going on. We don't need to hide our heads in the sand. Be aware of what's going on, but don't be discouraged, because we don't have to be fearful. We don't necessarily laugh, but we know the Lord does, because He has all of this well in hand, under control. Nothing surprises Him, and even the evil intentions and efforts of nations and Satan himself will be turned by the Lord to His ultimate will and purpose. Nathan, how can our viewers stay in touch with many of the things that we put out, not just the prophetic perspective, but all the things on our website?
Well, we ask that you like and subscribe on this channel. We have links below to our website at christandprophecy.org, and download the Lamb Lion app.